Good day, Flight Simmers. Today we're going to take a look at the Pitt Special. The Pitt Special S-1 and S-2 is a series of light aerobatic biplanes designed by Curtiss Pitts. It has accumulated a lot of competition wins since it was first flown in 1944, and the Pitts biplanes dominated the world aerobatic competition in the 60s and 70s, and even today they remain pretty potent competition aircraft in the lower categories. So we're going to use the world map, and let's take a look at this plane. So here's the S-1S, and so it's a single seater, that's why the designation S-1S, and then the two-seater is designated as the Pitt Special S-2S. So I've already done a tutorial flying this plane, and I'm going to try this one. This one proved to be a challenge to land. It tends to bounce, swerve, tip, so it's very sensitive. So this plane, we're going to give this a try and see how it flies and takes off and lands. So let's go back to the world map, and we're in the Toronto area of Canada. And we're going to do a cold start on the ramp here. I'll set that as a departure. That way we'll do a checklist startup for the aircraft. And we'll fly over to Toronto Pearson Airport. Now, you want to pick yourself a nice long runway here. I'm going to pick this runway here, 23. And set that as our arrival. Once I do that, we've got a GPS direct route from one airport to the other. So this is just going to help guide us in the right direction using the heads-up display that I've got turned on for external when we're flying this plane. So this plane does not have a Garmin system or a GPS map inside, unless it's been retrofitted. But for Microsoft, this particular version, it's not going to have that. So let's hit fly. So Curtiss Pitts began the design of a single-seat aerobatic biplane in 1943-44, and the design has been refined continuously over the years. However, the current Pitts S-2 that we just looked at a few minutes ago still remains very close to the original in concept and in design. Several of the aircraft that Curtiss Pitts built had a picture of a skunk on them, and they called them Little Stinker, and the single-seater, Betty Skelton, gave it the nickname Little Stinker. And the prototype S-2, which was the first two-seat Pitts, was known as the Big Stinker. So the prototype Model 11 was the Super Stinker, and the Model 12 got the moniker Macho Stinker. In 1962, Curtiss Pitts set up a Pitts Enterprises to sell planes of the S-1C to home builders. So a lot of people bought those kits over the years. I think the company that makes them right now is in Florida, and they have built many of these planes and fly them in competition. So it's quite an interesting plane, and we're going to take a look at it and see how difficult or easy it is to fly. So here we are inside the plane. So let's just take a look at some of the instruments here. I'm going to press Control 1 on my keyboard. So this is for acceleration, so like your G-forces would give you a good idea of what you're getting into, and you can adjust that actually. This is altitude, that's your magneto. This is your airspeed gauge, this is your turn coordinator, and your RPMs will show up here. We have here a oil pressure and oil temperature gauge, and here we have a fuel gauge for fuel low, fuel full, and I believe it also measures pressure or temperature here on this side. So a lot of these other little switches, we'll go through that in the checklist startup. We'll take a look inside this plane and see how beautifully it's rendered. I got wear on the seat, a little bit of wear and tear showing up just to make it look authentic. Here's some information for maneuvers, your different speeds. So like you've got your loops, your snap roll, hammered, lazy 8. So these are all different names for the different aerobatics that the plane can do. So you can take a look at that when you're get some time. There's your throttle, and just some more information here. For flat spins, use aileron with the spin for recovery. Alrighty, so let's take a look outside. So it's a little tail dragger here with a wheel on it, and it's a beautiful little plane, and it's very nicely rendered. The rivets, the cables, all really nicely done, and you can see that this one has ailerons on the top and bottom wings, so I can get them to move. Now some of these biplanes that were built, these Pitt Specials, only had ailerons on the bottom. Okay, so we've got a rudder here that's working nicely, and we've got the elevators. So just doing a little check to make sure everything's working with my joystick. Alright, so I'm just going to back off here. I'm just going to do a pushback for a little bit by just pressing Shift P. There we go. Let's just take a look at where we're going here, so I don't run into anything. Okay, so that looked like a pretty good spot to start from. I'm going to press Shift P again to stop the pushback. Okay, let's go through the checklist here. So, pre-flight inspection, ignition. So just highlight that until it's white and then press autocomplete if you want, or you can actually do it yourself with your mouse.
Ignition off.
Okay, master battery switch down here.
Battery master switch off.
Okay, starting procedure. So we are going to test and set the brakes.
Brakes. Test and set.
Now fuel selector. It's underneath here. Just autocomplete
Fuel
that.
selector on.
Battery switch. Right here. Autocomplete.
Battery switch on.
Mixture should be rich. I'm just going to click that so you can see where it's at.
Mixture rich.
Then your throttle, you want to open that a quarter.
Throttle 1/4 open.
Fuel pumps need to be turned on. Here we go.
Fuel pumps on.
Mixture idle off, cut off.
Mixture idle cut off.
Magnetos. I'll just move that so you can see it.
Magnetos on.
Okay, and then starter switch should start up the propeller. I'm just going to scroll down here so we can see.
Starter switch. On. Start.
Okay, you can see the gauge is starting to work now. Mixture rich when engine starts.
Mixture rich when engine starts.
Okay, now oil pressure. Okay, just checking that gauge.
Oil pressure.
So I'm going to force finish that because it gets hung up sometimes. So alternator field switch right here. So let's just auto-complete that.
Alternator field switch. On.
Okay, so before takeoff, just going to go outside here and have a look. Okay, so this is normal takeoff, so we're just going to look at this.
Mixture rich.
Elevator trim.
Elevator trim. Neutral.
Flight controls, free and correct.
Flight controls. Free and correct.
Oil pressure.
Oil pressure.
So we can, I'm just going to force finish that. Fuel. Take a look at that. Okay.
Fuel pressure. Check.
Okay. So let's just take a look outside here for a second. You can see the plane shut itself off. So we went through the checklist and everything should have been fine, but that could be a little glitch. So in order, if that happens to you, just click on here again and go to starting procedure. And rather than having to go through all that, because we have done that, so that it should be running, just reset the page and just put autocomplete. And it'll just get the plane going again. Alrighty, so let's take a look outside. And see where we have to go, over to the right. So just going to gently give it a little bit of throttle. So this plane's very, very tippy. That's all I can tell you. It's finicky and wants to take off, and if you turn it too quickly, it'll tip over on its side. And the wing will touch the pavement, and you'll have a crash. So we'll see how I do here. It's like we're taxiing out onto the runway. So I'm just going to go inside, show you. This is a pretty good view for approach landing. And I'm just touching my joystick to get these views. Now, the brakes work with the trigger on the Logitech Extreme D 3D Pro joystick that I have. So it's a very inexpensive joystick. So I'm using a keyboard, a mouse, and a joystick to do the flight. So it doesn't need a lot of runway to take off, but I find it helps if you have a lot of runway to land, because you want to try and land it at 70 knots and just set it down gently and let it slow down. Otherwise it'll tip right over. So let's have a look here. I'm just going to stop. Okay, turn this way and then we'll take off. Alright, so I'm just going to apply the brakes gently. And now I'm going to Give it some throttle. Should take off almost on its own, this plane. You can see it swerving a bit there. I'm just pulling back on the yoke to stabilize the plane. Seemed to want to tip over, but I just pulled back gently, and the elevators help lift the plane into the air and also stabilize it. So let's just fly out here a bit and take a look. You can see we are already doing 100 knots and climbing very quickly. It doesn't take much for this plane to climb. Very responsive. So I'm going to tip it on its side just by pushing the yoke, so you can see how responsive it is. And then if I push down and roll and twist, so it's very easy to fly this plane. Very responsive with the joystick. And we can go straight up. I'm not sure if we can do roll right over. Yep. And stabilize. There's the airport we just took off from. So it's quite easy to do stunts with this in aerobatics, but I find the real challenge is trying to land it. Just going to go down and fly over towards the airport again, and then just turn and head west. See if we can go over to Pearson and land this thing. I'm going to cut back a bit on the throttle and go inside. So it's kind of nice. You've got your turn coordinator there that you can see, your altitude gauge, your acceleration. So you can see all your gauges quite nicely with this view. So these are just different views that we have. And you can see your RPMs too, which is kind of nice. And I have that VFR map up, and you just bring that up using this toolbar here. So I'll turn it off and on. But that helps you get orientated to where you're flying on the GPS route. So it's sort of like having your cell phone on Google Maps or something, just to give you an idea of where you're going. So what I'm going to do is get my speed down and see if I can find that runway over here somewhere straight ahead. That's the 401 highway right there, and Highway 400, I believe. So this Highway 401 runs through Toronto, and the 400 goes up to Barrie. So let's see if we can, we know we're flying in the right direction here. And you can see a plane up ahead there landing. That's obviously where the airport is. The runway that we're heading to. So this is real live weather that we have going on here today. Get rid of that toolbar. So I have the heads-up display external turned on in my settings. So I can see my airspeed, engine RPMs, I can see a fuel, angle of attack, I trim what it's set at, vertical speed, altitude, and a compass, which helps immensely. So I'm just going to keep going until I sort of see the runway that we're headed for. And I am heading towards the airport, but don't forget that GPS is taking you right to the center of the airport, not really to the runway. So you have to keep an eye out for where the runway is. So very shortly we should see some flashing lights. I think this is our runway over here. So once I get closer, I'll be able to see it. So what I want to do is be doing around 70 knots when I try and touch this thing down. There's the runway now. You can see it's right here. So 70 knots is good for your approach. And that's not a bad view there. I'm just getting that by pushing the button on the top of my joystick. So that's pretty good for lining your aircraft up as you come in. So I'm going to let you see this exterior view so we can see how we are doing airspeed wise. And also how we're going to try and glide very slowly over the runway. So I want to try and bring this in. Barometric pressure, press B Bravo on your keyboard if you want to just check it. But I want to try and bring this in at around 70 knots. Not really lower than 60 because it can drop on you too much. Come up short of the runway. But if you're going too fast, like if you're doing 80, that's a little bit fast to try and land this thing. So what I'm going to try and do, keep an eye on the airspeed, and I'm going to try and bring it down very softly on the runway if I can, and try and get it really slow so that it'll just gently set down itself. Otherwise it's likely just to lose control and tip over, because we don't have any spoilers and we don't have any flaps to try and stabilize this thing like you do on just about all the other aircraft. So I've got the throttle right back to 0 here. Just totally cut back. And I'm going to try and glide this in. So the speed is good right now at 70. Slowing down, so I'm just going to try and let it lose its speed ever so gently and set itself down. So I'm just trying to keep it off the runway. Okay, it touched down on its own. Now I'm going to brake. Okay, so I got my finger on the brake. Okay, so that wasn't too bad. But you'll find if you bring it in like at about that speed, hold it off the runway until it starts losing speed and gently sets itself down, and then you brake. Don't swerve to the left or right very much or try and correct it. It's likely just to tip over on you. So I didn't use air traffic control today, so I can press the button and tune ground and request taxi to the gates, and then these chevrons will turn on. I'm just going to and sort of give me an idea where I'm supposed to go. Now be very, very careful when it comes to speed for this plane. It just likes to tip over. The little dancing rocket likes to tip. And you can see the RPMs are up on this thing, even though I've got it on complete idle. So if you try and turn this plane too quickly without braking to slow it down, it's going to tip over on you. So thank you very much for joining me on this flight. I hope you got some pointers on how to fly the Aerobatic Special S-1S, and it's a great little plane, especially if you want to do some aerobatics and have some fun with some of your friends on Microsoft Flight Sim. And like I said, not difficult at all to take off with this plane. It lifts off very quickly at around 60 knots. And also very easy to fly and maneuver, very forgiving, but the landing takes some practice before you'll get a decent landing. You may have to take a few tries, or if you're very skilled and have a really maybe expensive joystick, maybe it'll be a little bit more forgiving. So with that, I'll say thank you very much for joining me on this flight. When I taxi over to the gates on a little plane like this, we're not going to be able to get any type of ground services because of the type of plane that it is. So you won't be able to get catering or jetway connection, all those other fun things that you can do with the Airbus and the 747. So I'll say thank you very much. Goodbye for now, and I hope you join me next time on Flight Sim.